everybody.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks, Eamon. Sorry about that. I hope you people on live stream didn't miss too much. Basically, we're just Danny gave us a welcome to the session today, an acknowledgement of First Nations territory, and I wanted to talk to you about and have a conversation with you about the budget and our response to it. So I was just saying that initially I read the investment as an increase to the BC Arts Council of 15 million. A $5 million increase each year, when in fact today I got clarity that it is a $15 million increase, but it's really a $5 million increase to the budget of the BC Arts Council, going from $24 million where it currently is to $29 million for the next 3 years. So needless to say, I was not as over the moon as I was yesterday when I thought it was being increased from 24,000 to 39,000. And it was thanks to I want to get the fellow's name right because I know he's listening, Lee Bolton in Souk, who works in the cultural sector, said, no, that's not what it is, and he made me look into it further, and I did get clarification today from Spencer and from the BC Arts Council, Spencer Chandra Herbert, the MLA for this region. So, I guess what I'd like to do is to talk to you first a little bit about what I've learned in my position as at the Alliance over the past year and a half. What I've learned is that, as Donna Spencer says, sugar works better than lemon when you're dealing with politicians. And the idea that our sector would scoff at a $5 million increase and not be pleased with it, I believe it makes us look bad. If the general public sees that we are whining about a $5 million increase, I believe that it will affect us adversely, and that people will continue to think, and I believe that they think that already, that we are a special interest group who has a lot of entitlement. And I'm just telling you this because this is what I'm hearing. I hear this from the public. I hear this from the politicians. So I think that we need to own up to that reputation. So my thinking around this $5 million increase to the BC Arts Council is that it's a great start. It's a 20% increase to the budget. It's not the doubling of the budget as we had thought was coming for us, although you can never be sure with government promises, especially in elections. But I think it's a great start, and I think what it speaks to is it speaks to us and our need to step up our advocacy efforts in an ongoing way year-round. What I've been told from politicians over the past year and a half as I've met with them is that they never hear from us unless there's a crisis or there's an election. Other sectors like the sports sector, the health sector, the education sector are always doing advocacy work and always building a case with government for support. And I believe that I've come to believe that unless we are prepared to do the same, to step up our advocacy efforts and to be a mighty voice, more than just the voice of the Alliance, because we have been working hard at the Alliance to support and lobby for this increase, but it's the voice of many, and it's the voice of many in all the regions. So it's not just those of us in the urban centers. It's not just the Alliance. It's not just one organization talking to someone they know in the ministry. It's all of that, right? It's like all of us doing as much as we can to make sure that government and the public understands the true value of what arts, culture, heritage, and creativity, I believe, brings to people's lives, in their everyday lives. The other thing I've learned, that's the other thing I've learned since I've been at the BC Alliance, is that part of the reason we struggle to get validated by government and to get the support of government and have to constantly prove our worth is because we are not seen as an integral part of everybody's lives in the way that healthcare and air and education are. So in my mind, and I've been doing research and reading studies that have been published over the past number of years, and what I'm seeing and hearing, particularly in the UK, but also in the US, is that people are expanding the definition of what arts and culture means. They're looking at the idea that it needs to be more inclusive, that we need to think of the word creativity, that every single person is creative by nature and engages in creative acts and creative thinking every single day, but that they don't recognize it as such because they haven't been brought up that way. We haven't talked about it in those ways. And I think that creativity is a broad, inclusive terminology that fits what we're trying to achieve better than the word art in particularly, because art is seen as something as highbrow. It is seen as something that is the ballet, the opera, the theater, and indeed it is those things. But it is not only those things. And I think that we are part of a very large continuum of humanity, of a creative continuum, a creativity continuum, if you like, and that, those of us who choose to work as professional artists and, receive public funding, that we are one side of that spectrum, or one part of that, but that it does include everyone, whether they're writing in a diary, or taking a dance class, or taking their kids to an art class at Arts Umbrella. I think that it is about helping people to understand that they're part of it and not separate from it. So my instincts tell me that the best response to this budget is to celebrate it, to be grateful, to take steps, which I'd like to talk about later. By just putting this out there as sort of where I'm coming from as your leader at the Alliance, because it's not just about me, it's also about you, and I want to make sure that I hear from everybody what they're thinking. But my intuition is that we celebrate it, that we're grateful, but then we continue in our efforts to hold them to their promise, and to do what it is we have to do to work together with them to get the increases that were promised. We may not get them in this particular government. We may not get them in the next 4 years. But it's very interesting, because we have to remember that the Canada Council for the Arts, the lobbying for the doubling of the Canada Council budget began in 2004. And it happened in 2015. So that's the other thing you must remember, is that advocacy and education and getting people on side and understanding, especially more people, or the people in government, is not always as easy or as fast as we would like it to be. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I invite you to speak and say what you want to say.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. I'll just speak for now. So, just for clarification, you have mentioned that there is a $5 million increase in the budget with the BCR Council. Is that clear? Okay, and did they ever talk to you guys about how they're going to allocate those fundings? It's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yes, we had that conversation in the days leading up to the budget, right? When we were preparing our advocacy strategy prior to the election, we talked to the BC Arts Council, we talked to you, we held a meeting, and we asked for people's thoughts. And basically there's three main areas that the BC Arts Council has identified. And I would say also that those areas are changing, because there was also a meeting with Minister Bear that took place in December, where about 40 people from around the province were invited to talk to her about what they thought the priorities were for funding at the BC Arts Council. So prior to the election, the priorities were stability for core funded organizations, more funding for Indigenous arts organizations, and more funding for equity-seeking artists and underrepresented artists. And those were the three main areas that that were identified by the community and also by the staff at the BC Arts Council. The meeting with the minister brought different results. Was anybody there at that meeting besides myself that's here? Okay, so what came out of that facilitated meeting was that the two main priorities for the BC Arts Council moving forward was, first of all, number one, a decolonization of the BC Arts Council, and number two, funding for equity, Indigenous, and underserved artists. And that was at the very basis of everything that should happen going forward. And it was a very, very strong and unanimous place that we came to. And then there were all the areas that were identified with that as the baseline. And the areas were not that dissimilar from what we talked about in our election platform. So more stability for core-funded artists, and more Indigenous funding, more funding for equity-seeking artists. And so there were a few other things as well. Advocacy actually did get on the table as well, because, you know, we can advocate, but we kind of need the help of government to advocate with us. If you remember the days of participation, right? That was a government program, and people still remember it today. Why can't they do something like that for us, for our sector?
Can I just get clarification on that, though? To be clear, though, we don't know exactly what their plan is with that funding at this. Like, they haven't given a set plan. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, there's not a
Wrote because they facilitated that meeting, and that is now at the minister's office, and we are waiting for her response to that document.
Yes, I'm wondering, is it working? Yeah. I'm wondering if we should read the increase in the Creative BC, the $3 million increase for Creative BC the same way. It means that it's $1 million a year for 3 years. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's $2 million. Hang on. It's $3 million in total. So it's yes.
Hi, thanks. I'm confused, but I've been in and out of town a lot, so I've missed a lot of the activism around this. And when I first came to this meeting, I thought it was a $15 million increase to the BC Arts Council, and it's $5 million. And I'm now wondering why I've taken the time away from the office to come here. But we have concerns. Our organization has concerns because we've seen these increases happen, like the one at the Canada Council, and our organization got nothing out of it. And we fit all the bells and whistles in terms of we are one of the most culturally diverse organizations in Canada. And we're doing innovative and cutting edge work. So I have concerns because we've been watching representation on BC Arts Council's juries be extremely problematic. And we want that to be heard, that there needs to be more consultation and more representation, not just from culturally diverse artists, but I'm somebody who sat on a lot of juries over the years, and I strongly believe senior artists should be sitting on juries, and we're seeing less and less of that because, this is what I'm hearing from my peers, we can't take that much time away from our work for the amount they're paying to, it's not just you sit in a room and decide. You have to prepare for juries. And it's an enormous amount of preparation, and when you're a senior artist and you're managing a small organization, you're working harder than the large organizations because you have less support staff. I would have to say that in Vancouver, because of housing, et cetera, we have to look at administrative infrastructure and how that arts councils like BC Arts Council, Canada Council, and Canadian Heritage are demanding more and more bookkeeping and paperwork, and there just aren't the bookkeepers in the Lower Mainland right now. Like we're having trouble even getting a staff person for that, because what we're hearing now is all the good ones are taken up, and we'd have to go to a firm that charges us $100 an hour, and we're not getting the kind of funding that can pay for that kind of bookkeeping. So there's a bit of an administrative crisis for some of the smaller organizations. We don't have the funding for general managers. We don't have the funding for financial managers. So it's getting increasingly difficult. We'd like to see. I know there's been lots and lots of talk at arts councils about equity. My God, I've been involved in those conversations for 30 years now. It's been 30 years since I was sitting on the floor at A-Space in Toronto talking about representation of culturally diverse artists, and I'm still not really seeing anything more than tokenism. From my perspective of running an extremely culturally diverse organization where we have an international profile, but we're not getting the backing in Canada. When we were in Europe a couple of months ago, we thought, why don't we just stay here where they appreciate us? Like, why are we going back home? Like, it was really hard coming back home. And then to come back home to no increase from the Canada Council, no funding from the BC Arts Council, it's ridiculous. So I think that equity issues have to really, I think they need a study. I think they need a gender study. I think they need to really look at arts organizations that are staffed in executive positions just by women. Not that there's a female artistic director and a male producer or whatever, or male general manager. When it's just women running the organization, I'd like to know the stats of the way these organizations are being funded, because I'll tell you, I'm fairly certain when I look at any kind of PR coming out about what grants have been divvied up, you're seeing most of the money going to the large organizations, and you're seeing most of the money going to organizations in which there's male executives and artistic directors, or one male, one female. So we really need to look at equity issues, especially in this day and age. It's time. It's time. I've got one more thing here.
Can you just let us know which organization you're from?
Miscellaneous Productions.
Thank you.
In arts-based community development, man, oh man, has that section ever gone to, talk about colonization. Has that section needs to be decolonized. There needs to be consultation with senior artists with full-time practice in the area. Not somebody who's doing one show every couple of years, but those of us who are devoted to community, who have a different way of making art in community, who are truly collaborating over the long term, and who have a sense of responsibility to those communities. Not just, it's fashionable and leftist to do this work, and aren't I cool, but a real commitment to it. So and we've never in that section had an operating grant. Miscellaneous Productions has been around for 18 years. We do get some token operating funding from Canada Council. We get some operating funding from the city, and we can't get any from the BC Arts Council because we don't fit into any of their widgets. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you for that. I think we had somebody right here.
Okay. I just wanted to sort of steer in a different direction, and yes, I do think that the way that the increases are disseminated is totally important, and those conversations are really important. But I am interested in the concept of doubling the contribution to the BC Arts Council, and I have done some political advocacy training through the United Way's Public Policy Institute. I do think that we need more money. A lot of the problems that we're talking about would be solved by just simply having more money, and that's what I'm here today for. I'm sort of celebrating, but I'm also thinking that going forward, I would like to be a part of the whatever this working advocacy group is that stems out of these kinds of discussions. We do need a strategy. We need one just like every other sector in this province has. Brenda's right on point when she says that every other sector has a strategy, and they are there all the time. They are at the door all the time, and that's something that we're not doing, and we've never had as a group. and it's for a number of reasons that we all know about. We're too strapped to get together as a group. That's totally true. I know I'm willing to put some time into this. The other thing is we are dealing with the BC provincial government. As far as the urban and rural relations of this province go, I don't want to refer to us as a special interest group because I don't think that we are. But urban arts dissemination is completely different from rural BC, and the political context right now for this NDP government and any government that takes power in this province is there are a huge number of voters outside of the urban region, and they can throw the balance of power. So those of us in the Lower Mainland are not a majority in this province. So we need to repackage the way we talk about arts and culture and creativity and all those buzzwords in a way that politicians can get behind from a mass provincial perspective. They're not going to get behind us just here in the Lower Mainland wanting more money for our programming. It's a bigger thing for them, and also, read Horgan's ministerial letter to Minister Baird. It's on her webpage. He points out three really significant things. One is sector innovation and tourism. Another is affordability. That's a huge issue after a long time of provincial government in power. A lot of communities, and us too, are living in a really unaffordable environment. Wages are not keeping pace with the cost of living, and Horgan's letter to the minister is that we need to address that. So when we go with a strategy to the government, we have to actually put this in terms that Minister Baird can go, yes, these guys are helping me achieve the directives that my boss, John Horgan, gave me when I took this position. That's how you wrap and package things. But we have to keep an open mind for rural communities. We can't leave them behind. We will not get the increases if we don't include them, and we won't see another NDP government if we don't join forces with the entire province, because it's about critical mass. So while I'm happy to listen to people talk about the way that funding is disseminated once those increases happen, I really want us to think about a long-term strategy, like 10 and 20 years long, in terms of having a really strong vision for what this sector will look like in 20 years, and then a play-by-play strategy for getting there. And again, I really think that we need to pay attention to the urban-rural divide in this province.
Thank you.
The first part of the comment was a shout out to you for including the rest of the province. But I'll read the rest of the comment here. Looking at the wording of the speech, you will see that the 5 million is outside of the core budget, so it is not actually an increase to the BCAC budget. The last boost was 7.2 million. My concern is, why did the government not just say the increase is 5 million this year? Sorry, but this seems to come across as an effort to blow smoke at us. Honey is nice, but it seems that there was a deliberate effort to hoodwink the sector. Look at how many people were under the impression that it was a $15 million increase.
I think that that's a very good question. The only answer I personally have for it is that I think that's the way politicians talk, and I think that's the way politicians present themselves, is to look at the total investment by government, which is 15 million over 3 years. And I don't know if it was deliberately done to mislead us, but it did mislead us. I think that 5 million, which is a 20% increase, is not something that is I think it is a positive step forward, and I think that we need to acknowledge that it is a beginning. And I think this might be a good time to just share with you what Minister Baer sent to me, because I asked her if she would send me something that I could read to you today. And this is what she says. For the first time in a generation, your provincial government has made a significant investment into the arts community. It is because of your years of work and dedication that Budget 2018 will bring a needed and additional $5 million to the BC Arts Council budget. The BC NDP is the party that founded the BC Arts Council, and we are also the government that will strengthen and grow arts and culture across our province. Premier John Horgan and your government understand the important work that you all do to enrich the lives of British Columbians. That is why we have chosen to put the priorities of people first, making major investments into childcare and affordable housing. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you all in person to congratulate you on this victory. Know that we have taken the first step towards making life more affordable for the people of BC. I will continue to work hard for you as an ally and champion of the arts so that artists can afford to live in the communities that they work. Thank you. Well, that's actually not true, is it? Because we know that in 2013, 2014, the BC Liberals in their first year, which was actually part of an election promise, their budget was a 7.2 increase to the BC Arts Council in 2013, 2014. So it's very possible that, to be kind, that Minister Baer didn't maybe know that. Who knows?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Pierre. I'm Executive Director of the Centre Culturel Francophone de Vancouver. I'm going to say something further to... We've seen each other in so many meetings, but I don't remember your... Elaine, and I'm gonna say something that might be very painful for you to hear, but it's not good news. We applied to the BC Arts Council since I've been director of Le Centre for 24 years, and in the project categories for festivals, because we cannot get an operating grant because we do more than one festival, which is crazy. Like, they cannot look at all the programming we do in music. So anyway, but we had funding for 24 years, and this year we just lost it. We finished number 12 out of 11 festivals that were funded. There were 22 applications. We finished 12 on the list. And now I'm a little bit perplexed by what you mentioned, Brenda, by this meeting that happened in December, because I'm trying to connect the dots, right? Because I was told that we lost funding, but that nothing really changed in the comments from the juries. They were positive. The application was good. So everything was positive, but we didn't make it this time. So I'm trying to understand. So there was a meeting in December that was convened by the minister, and then it included people from all parts of the province and different communities, I suppose. I had never heard of that meeting. I'm not sure the Francophone community was considered in that discussion, or maybe there were a representative of the community, but I'm not aware of it. And the conclusion was that we need to decolonize the BC Arts Council, and we need to support indigenous artists and organizations, which is something I fully approve, because in our program, we always have Aboriginal French-speaking artists that do contemporary music. So I think we we fully agree on that. Although I'm trying to figure out, where does my organization or our community, where are we on this spectrum of decolonization or being colonizers? And so what are the specifics of that conversation? Like, does it mean... what does it mean to decolonize the BC Arts Council? That's not clear to me, and I'm wondering if what impact it means for us in the future. As I'm not sure there is a connection, but please, if you can clarify that, because I wasn't there, so I don't know what it means.
I don't think that they know what that looks like. I think I think that some of the things that came up, for example, I'll give you one. The First Nations representatives who were there suggested that any money that was being given to support Indigenous artists just should be going through an Indigenous organization. And it should not be a settler organization that is giving the money, getting the money and giving the money to the Indigenous artists, that it needs to be a direct gift to the Indigenous organization. So that might be one example of what it would look like.
I also wasn't at that meeting, so I think also didn't know about it until later. So this is just my own personal interpretation of what that means. By no way take it as true, but it's just when I hear those words, decolonization, of a system like the BC Arts Council, for me that means blowing it up and changing the way that the structure works. I don't know what that looks like, but understanding that the structure of having to be a nonprofit organization and having to do all this paperwork and having to have a board and having to go through all of this kind of rigmarole, really, in order to even be at the table and then have a jury that, as has been acknowledged, is likely not an equitable one, or not one that necessarily understands the cultural nuance of the work that's being brought. That's a problem. And so that's a similar way of, we look at Arts Council England, or the British Council, which assumedly was brought to light before the BC Arts Council. So they work in a similar structure. They actually don't have juries. So I mean, in one way, like, yes, we have changing juries, which a lot of other places with arts councils don't have. They just have program officers and rely on a lot more cronyism than we see. So yay, but there's a lot of work to do. And so when I hear decolonization, it is kind of a total shift in the way things are done. I think there's a question from online.
From our online viewers here, I am curious if the increase is actually to cover the increases to budgets due to the increase in the minimum wage. How much will actually stretch beyond that?
Great question. I mean, there are other questions that have been coming my way all day. One of them is also about the MSP premiums for organizations that have larger than $1.5 million in salary disbursements, that they will continue to pay MSP. And for some organizations, we're not quite sure how to interpret that. So these questions are very good, because as we get them, and I hope you're making a note of that one, Nancy, that these are questions we can take back to get clarification on.
First of all, I want to thank Brenda from BC Alliance for taking on the role on having this conversation with the NDP. I had no idea that there were these conversations happening, and I think there's been a great disconnect in terms of people from my community and people from the Indigenous community, and I'm assuming people of color too. For the first time ever, I had a first ASL interpreted meeting with the BCR Council in November 2017. That itself is so bureaucratic, because I am the first and only deaf applicant within the provincial government, and that speaks volume to their commitment to my community and others' community as well. So when I was a part of the consultation in December, they had forgotten to hire ASL interpretation, or I don't know what happened, but I did make a request for ASL interpretation. That is like the very first request that I make in any conversation that I need to have with the government, and it is expected that they are providing this kind of level of services to us. So when they didn't provide ASL interpretation, I missed probably 50% of the conversation. So I couldn't do the consultation any justice. So I did ask if they would reconsider hosting and consulting again, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I say this with great respect. There is a great disconnect that we really should be working from the inside and out. And my question to you is, how should we be having these conversations with the NDP what are the key language should we be using? And can you give us some kind of guideline on how to initiate those conversations that are respectful and looking for ways to create bigger impact? Because I'm tired of having individual conversation with these people. Rather, I could use my energy for better use.
Well, I think you're right about, being respectful. I think there's many things we can do, and I think it's our responsibility at the BC Alliance to, give you the tools to work with so that you know how to go about doing that kind of advocacy. But ultimately, I believe we have to do it together as a sector, and that there's a lot of work to be done to bring us together. We don't play together all the time, and we need to be much more collaborative across disciplines. We also need to be more collaborative across sectors, because there is support for our sector within the healthcare sector, within the education sector. And if we're all speaking about the need for ASL interpretation, or the need for described performances, or we need to all say, this is what we need, and we need to say it loud and clear. So I think it's what we need to do is we need to get together, as I keep saying, and I think that the way to do it is to, let's strike an advocacy committee and start meeting and start talking about how we can build this strategy, and how we can be inclusive of other sectors and of all the disciplines.
I just want to be transparent. I don't have very much experience when it comes to arts advocacy with MLAs one-on-one, but I do have experience when it comes to doing it in the health sector. I've done a lot of cystic fibrosis advocacy, and I can't tell you the amount of times I've been in those meetings where the MLA will say, but we gave you an increase. Like, if we go in that respect and that if you're coming in to ask for something, they know exactly what they've given you before. So I think that just reaffirming that strategy of saying thank you for what we have, this is how we need to make it better.
Thanks. A couple of things I wanted to just quickly talk about. One was the meeting in December, which I also didn't know about, and I don't blame anyone for that. Perhaps it's entirely my fault for not paying enough attention. But I'd be curious to the December meeting. Sorry, yeah. I'd be curious to know who the 40 people were at that meeting. I don't know if anyone can answer, because I'm looking at the priorities that were set. The first one being more stable funding for core groups, which make
Sorry, just to be clear, that meeting in December, those three, the more stable funding came from a different consultation. That meeting in December, again, which I didn't know about and wasn't at, the two recommendations that came out of that were decolonizing the BC Arts Council and more equity.
So December 2016 was the pre-election meeting about determining what the priorities should be for the BC Arts Council. We were advised by government to answer 4 questions. Why do you need the money? What are you going to do with it? How will it benefit your sector? And how will it benefit the people of BC? And that's the way advocacy works in all the sectors. You have to answer those 4 questions.
Sure.
So we use those 4 questions as a starting point, and that's what we answered in our strategy.
So I'm confused. Are you saying these 3 points that you listed earlier were not the priorities at that? I'm sorry.
There was one in December 16, and there was a meeting that happened that got struck with Minister Bear in December 17.
Yeah.
With those 40 people,
yeah.
And out of, I think this is right, there were the 2 recommendations that were loud and clear out of that meeting, and those two out of the one with the minister in December 17 were decolonizing BC Arts Council and equity.
And December 2016 was
the pre-election meeting, and those were those events.
Okay, so again, I guess it doesn't really change my question much.
Great. Great.
It's, who's there? Who's answering these questions? I guess is my thing, because core funding, that sounds like a priority by groups that are core funded. So it makes me wonder, and I'm not saying this is the truth, but that's who's there making that. Because when I think of all the project-based, I'm talking now from theater and dance because that's what I know best. Project-based groups, first of all, they're probably not organized enough to be there, which is unfortunate, which I know is the problem you're trying to address here on some level. But they may not be making that a priority. Let me put it that way. I think that's fair to say. Not that they don't all want core funding; they probably mostly do. But yeah, they might want the funding to go elsewhere. So yeah, I'd just be curious, and I guess nobody can answer this, who was there, and to come up with these particular priorities, including the decolonization one, which is that's such a big, vague notion when it comes to something like this. I myself met with the BC Arts Council, and this will address maybe a little bit. Oh, she's gone. What Elaine was talking about earlier, part of what she was talking about earlier, which was around the composition of juries and her notion of senior artists there. And I think you can't just have senior artists there, but I think if I understood what she was going for, and maybe the same concern I have, is there needs to be some level of expertise in the juries, and that was my main point to them. The juries were really problematic when I sort of broke down and looked at them, that individuals didn't have enough information even about their own disciplines, and certainly next to none about other disciplines in this age of interdisciplinarity. So while I understand that I've sat on a number of juries, so I understand the difficulty of trying to represent all regions, genders, ethnicities, identities, all that kind of stuff. So yes, that's awesome. And then if we can put into that demonstrating some kind of expertise. I mean, one of the officers said, well, we always ask for resumes. And I said, I've never been asked for a resume. I have never met anybody who's been asked for a resume. There's no vetting when it comes to expertise. And so what happens, my struggle there, besides like you're writing a grant to somebody who doesn't understand what you're writing because they don't know enough, is also that I think it holds the art back when people don't know enough. So you're actually, it's the same argument I've had with the critics in Vancouver over the years here, and there's been some movement lately, which is if the critics aren't up to date, then they play a role in holding the art form back. You can't move forward. And I think that's the same with the juries. You know, you're talking about interdisciplinary. BC Arts Council doesn't have that. This is just an example. And there seems to be some excitement around it, but no way to really address it because people don't know what it really means. So that's a big issue for me. That maybe overlaps with some of the concerns over there. What else was going to say? I think that's it for now. Yeah, sure. Somebody else probably has something smart to say.
I just want to jump in
yeah.
quickly. Alex, to your thank you for raising the question about the core funded organizations. You know, it's dangerous for me to say this because I'm representing the BC Alliance, but I think that is a colonial structure. That commitment, it's where it started. The Canada Council started by initially investing, as did the BC Arts Council, as did the cities, the municipalities. In the organizations, this was 50, 60, 40 years ago. And that's where they put their money because there were no structures. They had to invest in those people, and they had to keep those places running. But times have changed, and I think that priorities need to change, personally. I think that there needs to be more equitable distribution of funding, and I'm not alone in thinking that, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it, because I think that, you know, certainly nobody likes to lose funding, but there is a time when, if we're not getting more money, we have to find a way to share what we have.
Can I speak to that a little bit? Sorry, thank you. Is that all right? So, equity is I think a term that I'd like to hear maybe talked about a little more here, because I'm not sure how people are using it exactly. The company that I've been the core artistic director for a few years now. It's been around since 2000, I think. Started out as a queer family circus. It's been a very diverse company. It's the first company in Vancouver, I think, besides outside of the like Theatre Terrific and stuff that really worked with, for example, Niall McNeil, for example. That happened with this company. So there's been a lot of attention around that kind of stuff over the years. But I'm a little wary of some of this talk because if we look at the UK and Holland over the years, the artists have been used by governments kind of as welfare is being cut. Artists have been used as kind of like exemplars of, oh look, community art. they'll go out. We can cut welfare because these artists are doing community art, and in that sort of movement, and artists are entrepreneurial, and they don't put a big burden on the system, so they're kind of loved by governments on a certain level when that sort of thinking comes into it. At a certain point, though, I'm really interested in art, and now this is a subjective thing, of course, but art for art's sake, art, it's an inherent value, and not having to justify it in terms of community values and all those kinds of things. It just automatically is those things as far as I'm concerned. And I've had people at the BC Gaming Commission say, artists aren't part of your community. I don't know what that means, especially in a province where so many people identify as artists. So at some level, yeah, I get the diversity, but I also want to argue for our professionalized art and artists who do things at a very, very high level, and it requires a certain kind of rigor, a certain kind of training, and it has certain lineages, and I don't have a problem with those lineages in and of themselves. I think they need to be championed as well, as we're arguing for these other values, and they're not mutually exclusive. But I sort of think that in the same way that, say, if you ever read Claire Bishop's book, Artificial Hells, her introductory chapter, you have art institutions doing community art, children's parades, and the one thing you can't do is evaluate them as art. That's not allowed. You can evaluate them ethically, you can evaluate them as social politically, but you can't evaluate them as art because that's somehow seen as inappropriate. So I'm just making a sort of a case in a way for old-fashioned art, not necessarily for the institutions around them, but for professionalized, discipline-based, trained artists. Yeah.
Jean-François from the Francophone Arts Council. So I'm going to echo a few things that's been said already. But first thing, yes, it's an increase. So I think it's a good thing. We cannot deny that. It's not exactly what we were asking for. So in my point of view, I think we still need to reiterate the actual need, like what we came with, the amount and stuff, to say that we still need to get more money in the bank. So we can do it in a positive way. So I'm totally agree with that. So bring it to yes, it is an increase, but we hope for a bit more. I think the strategy it's one key here. I think we really need to come together. You mentioned it, Brenda. We need to all work together to create that strategy, to bring it to the government and work together as well to present what we need. I think we need to actually document as well, like what's the actual needs. Some organization has been cut, some organization that cannot even get into it. So maybe get more into the actual case and actual more on the fact, like whose organization, not necessarily putting those together in front, but just documenting, like this is those organizations, they're doing a good job, they're doing good events, they're being funded from that many years, and at some case, because they need to get some more or new organization and festival on board, they need to cut, so take money from one to get to the other, and this and that. So I think that would be not necessarily as a threat, but just showing the real picture and the impact of it. Talking about strategy, and I'm just putting it out there because we've been talking about that for a little while around the meeting we had with the Provincial Arts Service Organization, the PASO. We've been talking about the day at the legislature. So I'm wondering if we've been talking about it for a bit of time, the money wasn't there, and this and that, and I totally understand, but I'm wondering if that could be one step and one action. It's we all get into it, and if it's the funding that's not there, we all step in, and we decide to put our money in and go for it, because I think that could be a good timing. Like, there is an increase. We haven't got any increase for the BC Arts Council for quite a while, so I think it could be a good way to jump in and do that day as a positive matter. Like, yes, we want to acknowledge that, but in the same time, of course, it would be a good time to spread the word as well that we won and we're looking for more. So I'm just wondering if it would be the perfect timing. It's a new government as well. So I'm just putting that on the loop. I think that could be a good specific action, maybe.
We've actually got two comments here. One is mine. Earlier there was a talk about being more inclusive of the deaf community, and I realized that we'd been panning the webcam away from our signers here on stage to the people in the audience. So we're going to keep it focused on the signers there. If anybody at home is wondering what's going on, we're being more inclusive. The other comment here is, please read this ministry service plan. They are expecting the BCAC to increase the number of grants given from 1,400 to 1,600 grants in this coming year. So not much for giving extra funding to existing groups. So they are offering a 20% increase in funding while expecting to increase the number of grants by 14%. The ministry service plan says that they are expecting the BCAC to increase the number of grants given from 1,400 to 1,600 in this coming year. So not much for giving extra funding to existing groups. They are offering a 20% increase in funding while expecting to increase the number of grants by 14%.
So that sounds to me like that's a directive from the minister being given to the BC Arts Council, right? So, we'll need to get clarity on that from the minister, and what her thinking is and what are her priorities, and who are those people? Are they people in rural areas? Or are they emerging artists, or are they people of color? Who are they?
Yeah, I'm always astonished at how arbitrary things like that are. There is really no... The idea that a general increase in the number of grants is going to be carry out some sort of great equaling or expansion is kind of wrong by itself. For people who don't know me, I'm Kay Higgins. I've been active in artist-run centers in visual arts going into my 4th decade now. Seen a lot of back and forths on this, and the thing that strikes me whenever we do advocacy, and when we see government's responses to our advocacy, positive or negative, but especially when it's positive, I think our asks are too arbitrary themselves and too low. What we should be asking for is a universalization of access to culture, which, after all, is an internationally agreed human right. And access to culture means not just that everybody could go to a theater or music venue in their community and have meaningful access to it, but that everyone has meaningful access to create culture that is across racialization boundaries, regardless of indigenous status or not, regardless of gender, and regardless of economic class. And this is another place where our ask is very, very low, and our horizon is much too close. Now, nobody blames us, I think, for looking at the next year or the next 4 years, especially when we're looking at cycles of government. And you see the predictable cycle of government that goes year 1, well, we got into office and things are worse than they thought we were. So we're not going to give you everything that we said we would, and there's going to be some austerity. Years 2 and 3, it trickles back a bit. Year 4, they go, we are so brilliant at our management. Here are some bonuses. And then you have an election, and then they go, damn, there was something we didn't know about. Okay, well, we've got to look beyond that in terms of horizon. And we've got to look beyond that in terms of what we want to ask for and what we want to achieve. And I think a really good start would be endorsing the idea of, and this in itself is going to sound like a small, timid ask when it comes out of my mouth. Living wages for artists and cultural workers. This should be a minimum ask. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but something that we all in principle work toward as a form of community development, as a form of poverty elimination, as a form of economic development, as a form of forging social links. Thanks.
Yes, I think Brenda, your idea of having an advocacy group is really a good idea, and I mean, but I want to go back to a comment you made about what it means to sorry, I'm having a hard time saying that word in English. Decolonize. Does it mean that any organization that has a history, let's say our organization is a little bit more than 40 years old, that we need to be blown up because we have a history? That's what I'm hearing. And of course I'm caricaturing a little bit, but I know for sure that the artists that we do present are not part of the mainstream music industry. They have no agent, they have no publicist, they have a hard time promoting themselves. And I know that if the festivals that I do organize do not present these artists, they will simply not be presented by another event organization. And it's going to be the case this year. Unfortunately, we'll have to uninvite artists that were already invited. And on the principle of, being anti-colonial, we all want to be anti-colonial. We don't want to identify ourselves as being people who colonize other people. But at the same time, there is a principle in arts management, which is result-based management. I think it's worthy to look at what an organization are doing and what do they achieve in terms of giving a voice to underrepresented communities. Are they presenting artists who reflect the diversity of the population of Greater Vancouver and so on? And if the organization is meeting those goals, should we not fund them and let chaos happen and nothing happening for the artists that they would present in hope that someday another kind of less organic structure will take our place and present those artists, which could take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and we could lose the voice of a generation based on that principle. So sometimes, we want to be radical, but we have to think of if we are going to blow up the whole art and culture sector, what are the consequences on the artist? Not all of them can swim without a little bit of expertise and a little bit of knowledge that has been gained by organization. And it's been a struggle for us. We're really not mainstream. So I'm really perplexed by this concept and what if we blow up everything, what's going to happen tomorrow? Like for the artists that we are, the agenda that we have is to do a better job for the artists. That's what we want. But I'm not sure that by blowing up the sector, those artists will gain anything. Some of them will not gain anything. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, you're right. Artists need support, and I again, just to be very clear, I was saying that was my interpretation of it. I wasn't at that meeting. I didn't bring it up. So I mean, I'm not, and it's also not somebody the other day said that the term unceded was very triggering for them as a white person, and I said, well, it's not actually, it doesn't matter, like, because that's too bad. It's too bad. So yeah, so this is not a term that I've come up with. I'm a settler here, and so it's also in due respect to the land that we live on, and an acknowledgement that we have actually colonized the way that culture was shared here before. So I think that it goes back to that there was a way, there still is a way that culture is traditionally shared on this land, and it is not being respected in the power structure that we have right now, regardless of, which isn't to say like you're a bad person or you're a bad, like we're not bad people necessarily, maybe, but we're not bad people. We're trying our best. I read something this morning about equal rights. Just because you're asking for rights for somebody, like equal rights are not pie. Just because you're asking for rights for somebody else doesn't mean you're going to lose something. So, again, I don't feel like I can too articulately speak to this. I can do my best as an ally, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it. And it's not in any way saying anybody has done anything wrong. It's about how do we do better.
Yeah, hi. My name is Roberta Sheretta, and I'd like to just speak as a very naive. I'm sorry I missed the first half hour, so I'm not sure what you talked about. And other than yourself, I don't know who anybody else is here. Oh, other than Elaine, because I know your art. But Kay Higgins, she said a lot of things that that I agree with. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. But so my perspective is this: as a mature. Closer? Oh, okay. Sorry. As a mature emerging artist from Art Emily Carr University, I am astounded. I mean, I came from 22 years in a nonprofit sector. How much the arts and culture. I mean, so I have a lot of experience coordinating, working in nonprofits, but not in arts and culture. I cannot believe what some organizations. I'll try not to specific names, but actually are looking for, like, I'm a photo-based artist, that's my major, and so I thought, oh, okay, I'll volunteer doing, photography for this very big theater company. And I cannot believe recently, like the kinds of things they're asking artists, people to do for free, which I know in the nonprofit sector I worked in, which was nonprofit social services, we would have paid for that, but it was basically a part-time job, 20 hours a week in the office doing admin work. They're asking a volunteer to do it. And I mean, I'm just in shock. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I applied to a smaller contemporary art gallery. It's actually the contemporary art gallery. And, I mean, I was like, okay, how much should I say? Because, I have work experience that is transferable to arts and culture. Don't want to sound overqualified, but I'm also trying to sell myself to get in to volunteer. I got a response, and I'm thinking, I wonder if it's one of those co-op students, which, of course, I wasn't eligible to be a co-op student because I was over 30. That's another issue as a mature art student, graduate. And I'm thinking, I wonder if it was one of those, that responded saying, right now we're not accepting any volunteers, but thank you for applying. Even though on their website they go, we always need volunteers, because I'm thinking somebody would just love to have me work for them, because I come with 22 years coordinating experience. I'm super resourceful. I speak three and a half languages. I mean, I could go on, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe the person who actually saw this email is a volunteer herself. Like, so I'm trying to figure it out, is basically what I'm saying, which is why I'm here, because I'm trying to get the bigger picture. It's not something you learn at art school. I didn't get an opportunity to learn anything about the arts and culture sector. So, other than we had somebody come from the Alliance to talk, the previous executive, to talk about, hey, do you know about us, and sign up and become a member, which of course I couldn't afford to be a member, but anyway. And I'm glad to see I was one of the people that filled out in extensive form the thing about do not put don't put up an ad unless you specifically say what you're willing to pay. That was a great thing, and I'm so happy to see that. The other thing is, I'd like to see every artist for anything get paid. What do you call it? CARFAC fees. If you live in BC, God help you, you need CARFAC fees. And the other thing that I'd like to see is more marginalized groups get funding. Like, I just got my first art grant because it was easy to, well, I shouldn't say easy. I just happened to live in the right area where they're giving small art grants. It's a small grant, but I started small because, to be honest, after the BC Art Council came to my car and talked about, I just was so intimidated. I really was. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'd missed the deadlines anyway, but yeah, I mean, I actually didn't find that guy that knowledge, that, he said, well, just apply. You'll figure it out as you go along. It's like okay. I don't know. I find the arts, there's a lot of people doing volunteer work, and if you say anything about it, you're like, I feel like you can't really say anything about it because you're going to be blacklisted. But I just couldn't believe that the big shock was that job that came across, like 20 hours a week in an office at the Arts Club. If anybody here's from the Arts Club, I'll tell you to your face, pay for it. I don't know where you're going to get the money. Go ask some big corporation. Go to some lawyer's office. But to ask a volunteer to do 20 hours of unpaid work a week, that's a part-time job. I don't know. It makes me really angry, to be honest.
Thank you.
Sorry for the rant, but
No, it's okay. Thank you
somewhere.
for sharing that. We have a question online, and then Jessica will go to you.
This is kind of a two-parter. We should be looking at some other models. I really like the Saskatchewan model, where lottery money goes to the nonprofit sector, and it is administered by the sector rather than by the government. And the second part is, I agree that we should be asking for much bigger amounts. $5 million increase is frankly peanuts. Being happy with that is wrong.
Well, just to be clear, we asked for a doubling of the BC Arts Council budget to $48 million, which was modeled on what had happened at the Canada Council. So the ask was big, but to your point, I think it was Pierre, did we, or Jean-Francois, maybe we did not, say this is where the money would be spent. And maybe we have to get into that level of detail, but we did ask for a doubling of the budget. And I think that we can use that as leverage when we are lobbying in the future. But I also think that we have to come up with some really strong advocacy stories, in a way. People who live out, as I believe Jennifer, you mentioned it. Jessica, I mean, that, the people who live in the rural areas, they're actually very interconnected with their communities, and everybody knows who they are. So they have a very different opinion of what is art and what is professional. Alex, to your point, they don't care if it's professional, right? So I think the idea, again, I'm going to keep saying this because I feel it in my bones, is that if we are not inclusive, if we do not make people feel that they are part of what we are, part of us as artists, or artistic, creative, whatever the word is, that we will continue to struggle forever.
Yeah. So the thought that I had was like a few speakers ago, but of course, like it comes back to the same point, which is that at least a doubling of the budget, I think we can all agree is kind of the goal right now for the sector. And a lot of good points have been made about how and why that needs to happen. And I think that, and I'm saying this because I actually have to leave early, that you can put me down for advocacy work. But I think we do need to find a way to incorporate rural BC's opinions and valuations of this concept into the larger picture, and make it so that it's really a BC-wide initiative that we undertake in terms of doubling the budget at BC Arts Council. And when we were facing those huge draconian cuts in 2008, 2009, we were talking to each other in a better way back then, because we were like desperate. But we were talking about having people recognize the role that arts and culture plays in their everyday lives, And I think we still need to do all of that work. Like we need to do some deep digging around that and how we are going to package that and put a budget to that and justify the doubling. We were talking about things like, BC Fishing Magazine. That is paid for by BC Arts Council, by BC Book Publishers. When you play a video game, those are art school people make those video games. When you watch film and television, that comes out of the performing arts sector. When you watch pop musicians on Instagram, those people also came out of the performing arts sector. I think all those connections are there, but if we're going to develop a strategy for advocacy for the R sector, all that language needs to be really, really fleshed out. And I'll just say it one more time that it needs to be a province-wide thing. We're just the little old Lower Mainland here, and I don't want to just talk amongst us. I want to include a lot broader of a spectrum of people in that conversation.
I totally love what you said about including the rural communities, and we're just about to go tour into those communities. We're going up to Prince George region to work with incarcerated youth, and we're bringing hip-hop dancers, professionals who grew up in my company, who were kids in my company and are now professionals in my company to lead these workshops. And we're also bringing four of the youth from the last show. And we didn't get that money from the province of British Columbia. We couldn't get any money from the province of British Columbia. That money came from Canadian Heritage. So we're going into these more rural communities in the Okanagan region. We were invited on to, in terms of working with indigenous communities, and respectfully, we built up a relationship over years and years and years of doing workshops in the Kelowna region with West Bank First Nation. And they're a really artistically minded nation. They're very much rooted to their culture. They're really, we're working with the youth center. We're not working with their arts and culture people. What a beautiful group. And for the first time, they've invited us to come in onto their traditional land and do our hip hop dance and our theater workshop with them. Now's the time. If you want us, what we do in these communities is we do youth only discussions. And I grab all the adults and get them out of the room, and then I ask the adults what they need in their region in terms of arts and culture. I can feed that information back to you. It's coming, and then the youth facilitate the youth. Our youth facilitate the youth, and then we all come back into the room in order to preserve the confidentiality, because there's a lot of youth at risk that we're working with, and there's a lot of kids who are foster care, criminal justice system. So to keep their identities confidential, our youth report back in the room. And then if they want to stand up and talk, they can. So I'm going to the front lines of these rural communities. We're going out to Mission. We're going to be working with the alternative school in Mission. If you want me to feed back, because I'm coming back with all this stuff that I usually feed into federal government, I can send you copies of everything. And then you've got the people from these regions telling us what they need. They love when we come in because for these young people, they cannot afford the arts and culture in these rural communities. The arts and culture in rural communities is, if they want to take a hip-hop dance class, it's way beyond their budgets. These are kids who are going from foster care home to foster care home, or they're living very low income. The arts in these communities for younger people, for marginalized people, for people of color, for Indigenous people is way too expensive. Theater tickets, everything, way too expensive.
You may.
When we talk about a vision, like, it has to be pie in the sky, and it should be full access. I think Kay already sort of said it a little bit more articulately, but it's like full access to culture and the capacity to create culture. Like, the vision has to be so amazing. We're talking. The cure for cancer, escaping death and aging. Like, it has to be big, and then we work towards that. Because if we think small, that's all we're ever going to get.
And I think further, thank you, Elaine, for that offer.
And for me, this is a dialogue. Like, I don't have to hang on to the mic.
Great. I feel like there is, but there's so much incredible work that so many folks are doing in the arts that are in this room and that are across the province, and sharing Jessica's knowledge and advocacy, and Alex's information about being in that meeting, and Elaine's information about where she was, and Landon, your experience, and the experience of the Francophone community, which we also don't, as an Anglo majority, don't speak about enough probably. And I think that finding ways for us to continue to share these learnings, and so that because there is always kind of a start and stop, especially in where advocacy has been. Like, something terrible happens and we all freak out and we start from the beginning, but continuing the conversation and continuing to share the information we have, I think, will just continue to make us stronger and stronger. So thank you for that.
Yes, and it is making our voices heard and making many voices heard that will actually lead to change. We're seeing that all over the world right now. I think that there's something that's really interesting that I was never really conscious of until I started working at the Alliance. And I think it's something that we need to think about. It goes back to what you were saying, Kay, about access, and what Jessica's been saying. When you look at what they call the creative industries, we're talking about media, which is film and television and gaming and all of those things. You talk about music, and you talk about literature. Those are the three things that are considered creative industries. And the reason they're called creative industries, as you probably know, is because they're for-profit. The thing that they all have in common is that they're easily accessible for very little money. Every single one of them. Then you look at the rest of some of us, the visual art, the performing arts, and they are only for the people usually who can afford the tickets. So I think that is something we really need to look at seriously, because I believe that if we're ever going to be taken seriously as a force in society, that we need to have access for everyone, not just those who can afford it.
A quick comment here. Brenda, your comment about the rural areas being more connected is very true. We get our operating money by a referendum where 83% voted to raise their property taxes to support us.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Here? Okay. Hi, I'm Cheryl McGraw. I'm an independent arts consultant. I work with different arts organizations. It's tricky, isn't it? They've put us in a bit of a pickle because on one hand, Brenda, as you say, if we don't act grateful, they will say you're whining. And I worked for the Legacies organization for 2010, and one of the things they said to us in other sectors that we have the perception in the arts community that we aren't grateful and we do not acknowledge our funders. So that has stuck with me over the years, and that came from government at that time. So, they have kind of put us in a corner. So do we celebrate or do we not? I think one thing that concerned me was hearing from the BC Arts Council last week. I was at a meeting. They do not have the capacity. They are understaffed with 9 people running many programs, and many of them are to the max and also going on stress leave. So when one person leaves for maternity leave, it also leaves that organization without capacity. And so I think we need to consider that as well, is throwing money at things does not necessarily solve all the problems that we have in our sector. And so, I guess one of the other things for me is when they limit the amount of money that when they give to a project money, and they limit the amount of money that could be spent on admin costs, it perpetuates poverty in this sector, in that you can only spend 15% of that grant on hiring people. And I'm trying to get my voice heard about that, because I think for years and years it's just perpetuating poverty in the arts. And the arts are being run off the backs of people that are working for poverty wage, and that has to change, especially in the urban centers, but also outside. And I do work provincially, so I understand some of those issues. The other thing is when they invite those 40 people, to me sometimes they're inviting the same people. They're not inviting people they have not heard from, but they are inviting the same people who they talk to on a regular basis, and they are picked by the people in government. So you don't hear from the voices who are not at the table. I would really love to see them invite some young people that are not necessarily running the big institutions and organizations, to let their voices be heard.
Hi. Yeah, my name's Teresa. I live here at the Woodwards building, and I was just, struck by, like, we're talking about politics, and it's about money, right? So basically, there's a lot of poverty in Canada. So a lot of times they think of arts and culture as something that you can put money to after you've done everything else, like pay the rent and food and all that. So it's not really considered like a necessity, yet it is. Like, art is life in a way. It's not, it's a way that people express themselves from what they see as their worldview, or what they want to say about what they're experiencing right now in poverty. Like, I squatted outside Woodwards for 5 months, and now I live there. That's political, social activism, where it's necessity, like where you have to do this because you haven't got any other options, really. And I think the way that a lot of people are from Woodwards who live here who were the original squatters, we feel left out by Simon Fraser University, that we were co-opted totally by them by taking over our project. Now we have to be next to SFU, who gets to be the ground floor and has everything. We don't even get Wi-Fi. We have elevators that break down all the time, and we don't get any help. Well, my neighbor's OD. So I feel like if people want to be realistic, they have to look at where they're at right now. And I wouldn't mind saying, with SFU, I'd like to do something with SFU in Woodwards instead of just coming to these events and saying this over and over again. I just talked to one of the staff in my building on the 10th floor, where they have a doctor and a nurse. Yet there's still at least 15 people that OD'd in that building, and there's only 100 units in the past 2 years. So I asked if we can get in, some sort of printout of the number of people that have died at Portland Hotel Society buildings, what they call poverty pimps, because really they built it on the back of the natives and the white people at Woodwards, who are saying that there's an apartheid system in Canada, that we're not getting anywhere because of at the base, land is the wealth. And, a lot of people want to complain, but racism just means the fact that I don't own the land that I'm from in the way that the supposed government does. Why does the government own my land, yet my ancestors have been here over 100,000 years, and they just got here less than 100 years ago, or 200. Like, it's just that you just feel like there's an unending racism that you really can't explain to people in Canada, the apartheid system. I don't think we're doing the best that we can. When you look at the racism in Canada, the United Nations says that this is, in effect, basically an apartheid system where we're always last, but we were always first before there were no white people, no colonizers. So that's what really boils down to me. Colonization just means theft. You know what I mean? And white supremacy, or whoever the colonizers over against the people whose land they're on, like British Columbia is actually, this is Squamish land. It's the way I think. So, I feel if I come here, you want to hear what the people say, but there's absolutely no follow-up. Like, I've been here since 2010, since the Olympics, and come to a lot of events at Woodwards, but I never felt when I spoke up that it was ever recorded or valued. And I've come to a lot of things here, Stop ODs, theater, arts, mega, a lot of events here, and it's just never followed through on SFU Woodward's part. Like, I don't want to hear another. It's nice some singing classes native, but what I'm talking about is the reality of like. Right now, I want to hear that some of the money from when they're going to legalize pot is going to go partly to arts and culture, and that the gambling money that they are getting from the casinos should name the amount that goes specifically to the arts and culture ministry, So like say if it's 5 million, then they could say that 5 million came direct from the lottery, right? Or the casinos. And that way people can follow the money trail. Because I hear a lot about money laundering for at these casinos by Chinese realtors who are using that money to buy fentanyl and selling on the streets of Vancouver. It's a big deal. You know, this is something that is, well, the very heart of what we're saying. In a way, a lot of people, the money thing is necessary. You know what I mean? To talk about it like in specifics. Like I saw Winona Leduc here last month. It was sold out. I think our tickets were like $25 or something. We got them free from the Women's Center because we are in solidarity with stopping Kinder Morgan pipelines. So I just feel like if there's a way that we can directly link these projects of what's happening to, you know, right now, like where does the money come from, you know, and then where it is going to go, and to show results. Like I would like to have forums here every month about how we can stop these ODs at PHS buildings, you know, and I as a single individual person have to say this and get shut down by the management at PHS, yet the staff are agreeing with me, and they have made good suggestions like that they have to have a safe injection site in that Woodward's building right there above London Drugs to help my neighbors so they don't OD. And we need to do better testing, which need to be better innovative. And I think there's so much money that, like the movie business in Vancouver, you know, millions and millions, like they could put aside some of those money to funding, you know, projects right here, wherever they're filming, to help the people, and not just the cops who are always sitting there, you know, going, oh, you can't be here because of filming. You feel that you're being shut out from where you're going when there's movies shot here, and you don't get anything back as a person except paying money to go see the movie. So if they could do something realistic, like saying, you know what, movie budgets have to put aside 1% of their budget back to the local economy, and don't get it ripped off. You know, show the money trail, because that's really what I want to hear. Is like when I hear someone won 10 million or 20 million in the lottery, I'm glad for them, and I like, you know that they got it from that lottery. Then if we knew 1% of that winnings would go back to the Ministry of Arts and Culture, it would make it so it could be almost self-sustaining, because they could leave money in the bank and make interest. You know, like capitalists. Because thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for sharing that story. That was a very incredibly vulnerable thing to share, so that was really inspiring. First of all, I want to thank the camera person for expressing your challenges around when to film the interpreters and me. Partly the reason is the stage design is not accessible. When you have spotlight, it's in your eyes, it's in your eyeballs. Literally, it would be harder for me to communicate in sign language to interpreters, so I make that choices myself. So thirdly, I think I think this is worth celebrating. It would be nice if BC Alliance could host like a champagne party or a non-alcohol, you know, just to show to the public that we are appreciating the arts and we are in the right place where we need to be. We are showing gratitude. While we can hate the government at the same time, just hide that flame inside of you. So I think that's my three primary points I wanted to make tonight.
Thank you, Landon. I can tell you, you know, from the conversations I have with funders and with people who work at the BC Arts Council and the minister, that they are on our side. They want us to have more money. They do. It's just that, as Branislav Henselman keeps saying to us, if you've been hearing him lately, it's up to us. It's not, they can't do it because they work for government and they are not allowed to advocate. We can do that, and that is what we have to do. So I know I sound like a broken record, and I'm sorry, but sometimes I feel frustrated because it's such a big job working at the Alliance. And you know, many of you know that I'm, you know, hardworking and speak my mind, and you know, I'll try to do the best I can. At least I hope you know that about me. But I feel like I cannot do it by myself. I really need you to come forward and do what you're doing today, sharing your ideas. You know, come to a meeting, talk about what you think that big vision is. I've been thinking about that since I landed here. I've been reading the most interesting things, and I'm, you know, learning a lot and formulating a vision for that. But it needs to be our vision, so I need your help.
May I just have this has been a fantastic conversation, and the complexity of it. I've been involved in the arts for some 30 years as well, and there's so many themes that have come out, and we are a complicated narrative in a way. But when you come back to the point of maybe self-reflection, I think it's really important to maybe come back to defining what is our DNA. And when you talk about inclusivity, that should be automatic when you discuss the arts, or accessibility. It should be our core value. And in a way, maybe that's the messaging that we've got to be a little bit clearer on in the long term. I would just think that that's something important. Also, I just want to at least commend the government for this initial step. I hope it is an initial step. But also, within the backdrop and the context of the province at large, and you know, we've all lived in Vancouver and seen what's happened in the last 10 years. It's an extraordinary wallop that we've all faced in terms of the cost of living, as well as just the sheer housing issue. And I want to at least commend the government for making that big step forward. I'm critical, but I am also commending that it was a much more complicated budget than they probably had to deal with. So that said, but still going forward, I do think that we've got to address also within the weave is, and you brought this up, the notion of arts, culture, and creativity. In a way, there is within the fabric many practitioners that are professional, that have achieved it, invested their time, and there are also, as it were, standards, industry standards that we've had to meet in regards to people that are involved in equity organizations or other. And to some extent, we can't be ashamed of that. I mean, in the sense that, that they're getting more, they've got their demands. I think that is part of the fabric, and it's the hard part of communicating that there are, I don't want to ever for a second say that there are classes in this, but there definitely has to be something where we still want to respect that professionalism and that practice within all of what we're doing. And I know that the different media have different standards, but I don't want to shy away from that in the conversation, but yeah, definitely I want it to be an inclusive conversation going forward. Thank you.
I just want to get a little bit of clarification about what you just said, because I was having a little bit difficult time understanding. So when you say about setting a professional standards, you mean in relation to who's getting funding and how that funding is allocated? Okay, that's Sorry.
Clarify. No. So that for example, when you're involved in a theater production, and you're in an equity production, there is the standard of salary expectation, that kind of thing. So you have to meet it is what it is. So yeah.
Sorry, when you say equity, do you mean like actors' equity?
Yeah, yes. Oh yeah. Yes. Oh, okay, that's sorry. That's yeah. Okay, great. No problem.
Go ahead. No, that was it.
Okay.
That was it.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe some of you will remember more clearly than I when the BC Liberal government increased the 7.2 million. As I remember, and I could be wrong here, and I think a lot of this had to do with how understaffed the BC Arts Council staff are. As I remember, all they did with that 7.2 million really was, and I hope this doesn't happen again, they sort of divvied it up amongst all the operating companies, and it was percentages. So of course the large companies got most of it, of that 7.2 million, and then they created like more grant applications to fill out, and really, and all of these like specialized. I think a lot of them were tied to, I can't remember if it was the Olympics or what it was. I know there was an election coming up, and that was one of the reasons the increase came down. So I don't know how we would proceed with working with BC Arts Council staff, and I guess that's where Brenda's expertise comes into play and your board, in terms of ensuring that it's not again like you talked about, like this arbitrary, oh, okay, let's give all the, this is way too much work for us, let's just give all the money to these operating companies, and all you small organizations who don't get operating funding, well, here's a new grant you can apply for, and it's like really something that you have to, your small organization is going to have to jump through about 20 more hoops to get. And then when you get it, managing it is going to be, I don't know which colleague of mine once said, like, managing the grant is worth more than the grant, kind of thing, So I hope that the BC Arts Council, maybe what they need, rather than just throwing this money out there, is take some time to reflect, do more consultation with underserved, underrepresented groups. Yes. And but also talk about a strategic way of getting this money to where, because let's face it, the innovation in the arts in this city is not coming from the large organizations. It's not. The innovation is coming from the small groups, the grassroots groups. One thing that's been very exciting for our teeny tiny little company is somebody in Europe found us on the internet, and then we just started getting gigs there. We've been going over there fairly regularly over the past 3 or 4 years, and what they recognize here is surprising. What they know about BC Arts is not what you would think. It's not the big theater and dance companies. It's not the opera. It's not the ballet. They're really interested in what we're doing in community engaged practice. They're really, like, let's face it, Jeff Wall's a huge star in Europe. Photo-based experimental work. Photoconceptualism is huge in Europe. You go to Asia and they're interested in our contemporary dance. They're interested in not what you would expect, stuff that's coming up from the small companies. BC Arts Council, I know what they're going through, but let me tell you, would they rather be me applying for 70 grants a year so that we can make our budget, so that we can get to do all these things? I mean, I've sat on both sides of the table. I think that they need to really reflect. They need to go deep. They need to. I would rather wait for this funding to be distributed than this, let's just give it here and let's just create this, like, some deep reflection and some more, I don't feel like nobody, we've been around for 18 years. The BC Arts Council used to come and do consultations with us all the time. They never come anymore. They never see our work. They have no idea what we're doing. It's like the disconnect from Ottawa-Gatineau. There's this disconnect with these funders. They have no idea what it's like to be, an artist dealing with these issues. And if you are a group that's trying to be truly accessible, if you really are working for that, I mean, it's very difficult and it costs a lot of money. And there's a disconnect around understanding that. We've heard way too many times from the BC Arts Council, for instance, that our work is too expensive. If we do it cheaply, we will be disrespectful. We will be disrespectful to the immigrant refugee communities we're working with. We will be disrespectful, and this is what they're pushing us towards. We keep hearing these comments back from BC Arts Council, to basically cheapen our work. And so there's a disconnect. We need more dialogue with them. We need more face-to-face with them. Victoria isn't that far away. They need to come over more, It's great that you're talking to them, but I think that we need rooms full of people talking to them.
And I think they're willing to do that because I hear from them that they would like to come to meetings that are organized so that when we have them, we had a meeting of arts service organizations people in October, and I heard from them, gee, I wish we would have known about that. We would have liked to have come to that. So they would like to. They are understaffed, as Cheryl was saying. But I think to your point about the money, what we heard from the comment online was that there's a directive, and there's a directive that there will be 200 new. What did it say, Blake? 200 new grants. 200 new grants. So that means that's not operating people, right? that means, well, who knows what it means, but if there's a directive coming from the minister to the BC Arts Council saying that, then that's what they have to do. They might be able to negotiate a little bit, but they're staff. So this is what I would recommend. What you do is you write a letter to your MLA, right? Or you write and you CC it to the minister, or you write a letter directly to the minister and you CC it to your MLA. Living in the urban center, your MLA is probably Spencer Herbert Chandra, right? Right. Okay. So write a letter to both, CC it, and tell them what you think and where you think the money should be spent. But make sure you send a copy of it to the minister, and also send a copy of it to the BC Arts Council. But the reality is that you have to talk to the MLAs, you have to talk to the ministers, you have to talk to the people in government, because ultimately it's a very small group of people who are making the decisions. Well, then go to the minister, because that's her jurisdiction. Yeah. Well, you can't talk about but you can't. This is the problem we often have, is that we're talking about our own organizations and our own problems, and that's where it doesn't work. You have to speak on behalf of the sector. You have to say, we need more money to go to artists of color. We need more money to go to Indigenous artists. We need more money. You can't say my organization needs more money, because they won't listen to you. That's up to the BC Arts Council and the juries.
Incredibly problematic.
Yes, but that is a different advocacy issue, right? That is an issue with the BC Arts Council and the way they select their juries. And I agree, it's very imperfect. But we need to be the people who come forward and say, look, this is what we want.
Well, and this is what I'm advocating for on behalf of the sector, that there is time to reflect and there is more face-to-face consultation.
Yeah, it sounds like the messaging is around getting feedback from the community, implementing that feedback, and if these numbers of 200 grants are coming from, being clear about where that feedback came from and why that instigation is happening. If I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of we obviously have to do a lot of political advocacy for our own organization, and what we also hear from different politicians in different situations is that sometimes for instance, this 200 number of 200 grants is actually recommended by the Arts Council themselves, then goes back to the minister, and then the minister. So, we don't know where this idea originated, and that's why I think when I heard it today, it was like, oh no, we're just revisiting 2013, 2014 all over again.
It's that transparency piece.
I'm sorry?
It's that transparency piece that's really missing. I think, not to cut you off, Elaine, but when you're done, Kay had something to say, and then I think I saw a hand over here again. Yeah, so we'll go Kay and then back over here.
Okay, so
we've got 10 minutes left. So
all right. Well, I'll make this quick. We are talking about engaging with government, and so far we've been doing this for quite a while now through the arts service organizations. I don't think that's good enough. I think we need a lot more talking to ourselves. And if you look at the early history of provincial arts funding in BC, if you go back to the 70s under the Barrett government, there was an organization which, for various reasons, got its funding completely cut off by the government of the day, but it was a province-wide sort of congress of people working in the arts that was founded on a conference actually at Simon Fraser University. I think it was probably about 400 people at the first conference. For various reasons it didn't continue, but we have to speak to each other more about this. That'll solve a lot of peer jurying problems, because the problem with peer jury is, of course, who your peers are. And as long as and it'll solve, to an extent, urban-rural divisions as well. If we forge better sort of rhizomic connections between ourselves, rather than this pyramidal thing, which is fine. I understand why it's there, but it's not good for everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I think transparency and communication, what I'm hearing, really important. And then
But also the structure, what you're talking about, which is the creation of the BC Arts Council, and the fact that it isn't an arm's length body yet, like the Canada Council. That's a huge problem, and that's another issue that we have to try and tackle. It should be an arm's length agency, right? And it should be looked at in terms of where it works and where it doesn't work.
Just kidding.
Very basic, and that's completely lost in translation. People started talking about 200 grants, and I have no clue what we're talking about. Can someone explain what we're talking about?
Yeah, there was a comment that came through from online that said that in the services plan, is that right? Yeah, in the services plan, it was dictated, is that the right word to be using? It was dictated that while the increase to the BC Arts Council is 20%. We're also going to go from 1,400 to 1,600 grants per year. Yeah. So that was in the services plan that somebody online caught for us. That's the only information, just grants. That's the only information that we have at this time. Yeah. So that's what we're wondering about transparency for. Yeah, of course. We've got about 5 minutes, unless there are any burning things. I realize that we
could you just show of hands, how many of you represent an arts organization that's visual art based?
Only visual art, or do we do visual art?
Just visual art, okay. And how many of you here are from the theater performing arts organizations? That's what I thought. Okay, and you're a bit of both? Both, are you? Le Centre? Yeah, but it's the Francophone community, right? Okay. Right. I was just curious who was here, because I don't know if you did introductions, but you're all new to me. So, yeah, I'm just trying to get a lay of the land, as they say.
Welcome.
I think what's really interesting about the demographics of that is that theater is a collaborative, whereas a lot of the time visual artists are working solo, right? I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, but
is that another 3? That's another 2-hour conversation, right? Yeah. Okay. On that note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
who noted that on one of the papers I wrote about the supposed Vancouver school, because him told me it's not a formal school. But anyway.
Learning.
And I think that's not true. And I know SFU, for example, is very interdisciplinary. Sorry. No. I kind of want to challenge that notion that visual arts is, because having just recently graduated from Emily Carr and photo, there is a real push with interdisciplinary working in groups, blah, 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 right? And I know SFU's mandate, because I've been looking at their grad thing, is very...
I only say it because at the events that I've seen, where the Alliance has held since I've been here, and also in other cities, it's usually there's always more theater people that tend to come, and I don't know why that is,
is that right? Okay.
It's always seems to be like there's more theater people.
From your perspective. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
So we've got... Sorry? You got our own stuff. Thank you all. We want to give a huge thank you to SFU and to Michael for hosting us. Thank you so much for this space.
Partnering with us on this endeavor.
Thank you all for taking time out of your very busy, very underpaid schedules today to be collectively underpaid and busy together. It's a pleasure to share that with you. And let's move towards a future where we're maybe still as busy, but all have yachts or something.
Well, and let's also remember that, you know, the Alliance newsletter is where events are, publicized, because that's our communication tool. So, you've been here today. We've got your email. We're going to contact you and invite you to be, part of the solution, part of the planning. So I hope that some of you will consider that, because, like I said, we need your participation.
And please help us know who we're not reaching, because there may be more theater people, but that's on us. That's not on them. That's not on the folks that aren't in the room. That's on us for not making sure that they know where the room is. So, if you can please be our allies in that, in helping us spread the word about these events, so that we can have more voices in these rooms to make the conversation even more fruitful for all of us. That would be great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.